All right, let's talk about creating observation tables. Now, when you're performing experiments, one of the more important aspects of it is actually collecting and keeping track of your data. And to do that properly, you're going to do that in an observation table. So before we get into actually creating a data table, let's talk about variables because that's what we're going to be using to actually create our data table. Now, a reminder about what a hypothesis looks like. We've looked at so far. If I change this certain thing in an experiment, then something else will be changed because of it. All right. Now, if I change a particular thing, that is what is called the independent variable. In other words, that is the variable that I change. All right. So that is going to cause a change in some other variable. And that variable is called the dependent variable. So the independent variable is what I change in my experiment, and then the dependent variable is what changes because of it. And that's what we're going to measure. So we're going to be looking at how does an independent variable affect a dependent variable and keeping track of the data that comes from that. So let's look at an example. Now, let's say, for example, we want to know, does the amount of sunlight a plant receives affect how much it actually grows? Well, you may have an idea going into it that, say, for example, if you increase the amount of sunlight, the plant will grow taller. And you think that because plants need sunlight to grow. It's a pretty logical reason. Now, in this example, our independent variable, so the thing we are going to change is the amount of sunlight the plants will get. The dependent variable would be the height of the plant. So we perform our experiment, we set up a whole bunch of trials and collect a whole bunch of data, and then we want to actually put all that data together into something that we can actually use. So let's look at what a simple observation table that would look like. Now, this is an example of a good observation table. All right, so we can see at the top we have the title, and in this case our title is table 1, the plant height versus amount of sunlight. And if we look at the information that is found in our table, we have over here along the left-hand side, we have the independent variable. So that is the thing that we change. So remember, we change the amount of sunlight. And then along the top, we have the dependent variable. So that is what we are measuring that was changed because of our independent variable. Now, if you look carefully at our table here, you can see that for the amount of sunlight, our options were 4 hours, 6 hours, and 8 hours. So we obviously, as part of our experiment, have decided we would either have a plant live in 4 hours of sunlight a day, 6 hours of sunlight a day, or 8 hours of sunlight a day. And then the height of the plant, you can see, is measured in centimeters. Now, this, as I already said, is a good table, but there are some issues with it. There are some things that we can improve, all right? And one of the issues is this. It's a little bit cluttered in here. So this is a good observation table, but it's really not great. So let's take a look at how we can improve it. All right. So one way we can improve this table is simply by taking our units out of the table. So instead of the units being after each of the values, so instead of saying 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, and saying 7 centimeters, 9 centimeters, and 13 centimeters, we actually put that in the label. All right, so our units go here, not over and over again inside the table. So that clears up some space. It makes it a little bit easier to read. All right, now, again, this is pretty good. This is a lot better than what we saw before, but there are still some improvements we can make. Like, for example, what happens if the results we had were just a fluke? This is only showing us trying it one time. And as we've already learned, when you're performing an experiment, you shouldn't only do things once. You need to be able to repeat it over and over and over again, because that's how you know that your data is reliable. So instead of only doing it once, let's say we did it 3 times. So the layout is still the same. I still have the independent variable on the left, so the amount of sunlight in hours at 4, 6, and 8. And I still have the dependent variable, the height of the plant, in centimeters at the top. But now you can see I've created 3 columns here instead of just 1. So each trial can be represented. So instead of just growing once we're now growing 3 times in each condition. And if you look at the numbers that are in here, you can see, oh, well, maybe that first trial that we saw before, where it looked like 13 hours, or sorry, where it looked like 8 hours was the best. If you look at some of the other data, oh, maybe it wasn't. Right? We can see by doing more and more trials that there may have been things that happened that might not be truly representative of what is the best result. So by doing more and more trials, we can see, oh, see this plant or these plants here, this one actually grew less in 8 hours of sunlight. It actually grew less than the one that was grown in 6. So maybe we should have to do some more trials just to make sure. Now, looking at our table again, this is a much better table. Why? Because we have more data. It's laid out a little bit better, all right? But we still have one more thing we can fix, and that's the title. All right, so that title that we had previously was plant height versus amount of sunlight, which is, this is our independent variable versus our dependent variable. That's a fairly decent way to describe what the information is in this table, but it leaves out a lot of important information. So a better title would be something like the effects of changing the amount of sunlight exposure per day on the height of green bean plants after 10 days. So you can see there's more information given here. We're looking at not just plants, but we're looking at green bean plants. We're doing this after 10 days. It's not just some random number of days. Right, so by adding more information into the title, we actually make this a better table as well. So those are the things that you should be doing when you're creating a proper observation table. On the left-hand side, we have our independent variable. At the top, we have our dependent variable. We can create extra columns for each of the trials, and our title is descriptive. It gives a lot of information about what can be found in that table.